The first snowfall of the season drifted down like quiet prayers, each flake glowing pale against the sweeping dusk. The land held its breath beneath the weight of winter's first whisper, and the world seemed softened, slowed, as though remembering its own fragility. Snow gathered on the cedar posts that circled Tawa Red Elk's homestead, coating the bare earth in a thin, trembling sheet of white. The giant Apache walked with deliberate steps, his fur-lined boots pressing into new snow that squeaked underfoot. A fresh mule deer hung across his shoulders, warm still from the hunt, steam rising from its flank like the ghost of breath. The wind nudged his long hair across his cheek, and he paused to listen, to the quiet, to the cold, to the memory of winters that had carved him into the man he had become. Winter always reminded him of loss, of nights when silence meant hunger and hunger meant danger, and yet something in the hush of snow always soothed the fire inside him. It was a teacher, a mirror, an old companion. He exhaled, watching his breath vanish into the growing storm. As he reached the open yard, he felt a prickle race along his spine. His barn door, usually latched tight against curious wolves and colder winds, was not as he'd left it. It hung slightly ajar, the wood creaking gently as snow gathered along the bottom. Tawa stopped. His breath stilled. A single set of footprints led toward the door, then two, then three, some staggering, some dragging, as though desperation had carved them into the snow. Travelers? Thieves? Runaways? The world beyond his land had become unpredictable, full of settlers who feared him and men who believed Apache kindness was weakness. Yet the tracks were too uneven, too frantic for bold trespassers. Someone was hiding. Someone cold. Someone afraid. Tawa lowered the deer to the ground and rested his hand on the knife at his belt, not to threaten but to steady himself. He moved quietly, his massive frame silent beneath the snowfall. As he pushed the door open, warm breath from inside drifted out in a faint puff. Someone had lit a lantern. The horses stirred anxiously, hooves shifting against the hay. Tawa stepped in, letting the dim amber light pull shapes out of shadow. A woman sat curled near the far wall, arms wrapped around her knees, her dress torn by briars and travel. Strands of her hair clung damply to her cheeks, and her breath quivered with each exhale. Beside her lay a man, shirtless, shivering violently, ribs wrapped with what looked like strips of torn blanket. He was handsome in the rugged settler way, though weakened to the edge of collapse. His jaw clenched as he attempted to rise, positioning himself between the woman and Tawa despite the tremor in his limbs. The woman's wide eyes reflected the lantern's flicker as she whispered, "Please, don't turn us out. Not tonight." Her voice cracked like thin ice beneath a timid step. Shame and fear lived in that sound, woven into the very air around her. Tawa took in the sight slowly, letting his gaze soften. The woman looked half-starved, her lips pale, her fingers chafed raw from cold. Her beauty held no perfection, only a fragile resilience that struck him deeper than he expected. The man tried again to stand, but the movement wrung a groan from his throat, and he sank back, panting through clenched teeth. "We'll leave," the man rasped, though the words were hollow. "Just give us a moment." "You will not survive another hour in this storm," Tawa said quietly. His voice carried the weight of his size, but also a gentleness that often surprised those who judged him at a glance. The man stiffened, unable to hide his distrust of an Apache stranger, but his body betrayed his fear more than any words could. The woman reached out instinctively, touching the man's arm as though to soothe him, though she needed soothing herself. Snow hissed softly against the barn roof. The horses shifted again, unsettled by the strange tension. "You have food?" the woman asked, her voice barely audible. The question fell from her like a confession. Vulnerable, trembling, painfully honest. Hunger had stripped her pride. Tawa knelt, his enormous silhouette dipping into the lamplight. From the pouch at his belt, he withdrew strips of smoked venison, what he had planned to save for himself through the storm. Without a word, he offered them to the woman. She hesitated only a breath before accepting. When she tore off a small piece, her hands shook as if even the act of eating demanded courage. The man watched her, jaw tightening, not in judgment, but in a pride that was slowly breaking beneath the weight of hopelessness. He accepted nothing from Tawa, though Tawa could see how his body yearned for warmth, for food, for something to believe in. After a moment, the woman said, "I'm Lily Hartwell. This is Marshall, my husband." She spoke the word husband with a soft tremor, not of fear but of fragile loyalty, like someone who had spent many nights trying to keep another person alive with sheer will. Tawa nodded once. Tawa Red Elk. Marshall flinched at the name, though exhaustion softened his reaction. "We didn't mean to trespass," he muttered. We thought the place was abandoned until the storm got bad. It is not abandoned, Tawa replied. But it is shelter. And tonight, shelter is enough. Lily's eyes lifted to him with an almost childlike relief, though sorrow still clung to her posture. We were traveling west. Our wagon broke. Supplies stolen. Marshall fought them, he saved me. She looked down as she spoke, as if reliving the terror of it. We've walked for days. He collapsed this afternoon. I dragged him as far as I could. Marshall's eyes flickered with a mixture of shame and stubborn pride. You didn't have to help us, he said hoarsely. No, Tawa said. But you needed help. The barn settled into quiet. Snow whispered against the boards, weaving icy lace along every crevice. Tawa stood and moved toward a stack of wood. Without asking, without looking at them again, he built a small fire in the iron pit he kept for emergencies. Warmth slowly spread through the space, chasing shadows from the faces of his unexpected guests. Lily inched closer to the fire, though she kept a careful distance from Tawa. Marshall struggled to sit upright, determined not to appear weak before the man who had just saved them from freezing. Tawa, sensing the man's pride even beneath layers of suffering, kept his gaze low and his tone respectful, easing the sting of being helped. When the fire finally crackled bright, Tawa knelt once more. Your husband needs heat and rest, he said to Lily. The fever in his eyes is not from cold alone. Marshall bristled. Lily, however, swallowed hard and nodded, holding her husband's hand as though she could keep his strength from slipping away. You should stay until dawn, Tawa continued. The storm grows worse. Lily looked toward the barn door, where wind clawed through the small gap with a lonely howl. Will the town mind? She asked softly, almost apologetically. Us staying here, with you? Tawa's jaw tightened with a faint, weary understanding. The town minds everything I do, he answered. Whether I help or harm. Tonight won't change that. Lily absorbed this with visible sorrow, as if she could feel the weight of the bitter distance between Tawa and the world beyond his land. Marshall's frown deepened, but his eyes softened slightly in the firelight, perhaps realizing that the man before him was not the threat he'd assumed. For a moment, a quiet settled over them, a fragile truce woven from heat, hunger, and shared vulnerability. Then, faintly beneath the wind, a sound carried across the night. Hoofbeats. Slow. Distant. Intentional. Tawa turned his head, listening with an animal stillness. Lily's breath hitched. Marshall tried to rise, only to fall back with a stifled cry. Are you expecting someone? Lily whispered. No, Tawa said. The hoofbeats grew clearer, crunching through the snow with deliberate rhythm. Tawa reached for the axe near the woodpile, not raising it, not brandishing it, simply holding it as though preparing for whatever shadow approached. The lantern flame flickered as the wind pressed against the barn. The hoofbeats stopped, right outside the door. And in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Tawa realized this night's trouble was only beginning. The hoofbeats outside the barn door faded into a tense quiet, the kind that sharpened every sound and stretched every breath into something fragile. Snow hissed against the walls as if trying to whisper warnings through the cracks. Tawa Red Elk stood perfectly still, the axe held low but firm, not as a threat but as a promise to face whatever waited beyond the wooden boards. Lily Hartwell's hands clutched her skirt, knuckles blanched, while Marshall tried once more to rise, insisting through gritted teeth that he could stand, though his body betrayed him with a violent tremor. The lantern's small flame flickered in uneven patterns on their faces, casting them half in shadow, half in fear. When the hoofbeats did not return, the silence that followed felt even heavier. The kind of silence that carried intent. Tawa approached the door slowly, each step deliberate, the floor creaking softly beneath his weight. Lily held her breath, watching him with wide eyes that shimmered like wet amber in the dim light. She looked torn between wanting to flee and wanting to call him back. Marshall's hand lifted weakly, a feeble gesture of warning, but no words followed. His breath had turned shallow with pain. Tawa pressed 2 fingers gently to the barn door's edge and nudged it open just enough to see the snow-lit darkness beyond. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed except the cold. But there, hoofprints leading toward the tree line, fresh and deep, as though someone had ridden close enough to spy, then retreated before being noticed. Tawa knew that kind of caution. It was the kind that belonged to men who watched before acting, men who tested the edges of another's land to decide what danger or opportunity lay there. When he closed the door again, the barn seemed to exhale with him. He returned to the fire, placing the axe back by the woodpile in a calm, controlled motion that meant he did not want to worry the fragile couple further, though worry now curled itself into the corners of the room like a restless animal. Lily moved nearer to Marshall, adjusting the blanket around his shoulders, but her gaze kept drifting to Tawa, trying to read him the way one might read the horizon for signs of a coming storm. Tawa, sensing her eyes, remained quiet, yet something in his expression softened, as though he understood she was not afraid of him but of the world pressing closer around them. After a moment, Lily asked in a trembling whisper, "Was someone out there?" Her voice carried a hope that begged to be reassured, though she already knew the answer. "Yes," Tawa said simply. He did not elaborate, but the single word hung in the space between them like a slowly falling blade. Marshall's jaw clenched. Even he felt the shift, though exhaustion pulled at his eyelids. Lily looked down at the fire, drawing in a shaky breath. The warmth from the flames painted her face with wavering gold, making her look both weary and luminous, like someone carved by hardship but not broken by it. The air seemed to throb with unspoken fears, their own and his. She spoke again, quieter. "Do you think they saw us?" The question had weight, and Tawa did not answer immediately. He watched the fire instead, remembering winters when fear of being seen meant the difference between life and death. The world was full of watchful eyes, suspicious hearts, and judgments sharpened like arrows. "They saw something," he finally said. "Whether they saw you I do not know. But they were not passing through. They came with purpose." His calm voice made the truth feel colder. Lily swallowed, her breath catching. Marshall shifted, grimacing as pain surged through him, but he forced his eyes open, meeting Tawa's steady gaze. "What kind of purpose?" Marshall rasped. Tawa studied him for a long moment, seeing not just the wounded man before him but the pride stitched stubbornly into his bones. Men do not ride through storms unless they seek something they should not. Marshall tried to sit straighter. "Maybe it was just someone lost." "No," Tawa said softly. "A lost man calls out." This one listened. The distinction was not lost on Lily. Fear rippled through her like a tremor through thin ice. The fire crackled, breaking the silence. Tawa reached into his supplies and pulled out a small clay pot, placing it over the flames to warm the broth he had prepared earlier for himself. When the scent of simmering herbs filled the barn, Lily inhaled deeply, her hunger flaring like a ghost waking. Tawa ladled some into a wooden cup and handed it to her. She accepted with a quiet thank you, her fingers brushing his briefly. The touch startled them both, not in discomfort, but in the strange familiarity that sparked between two souls who had not known each other yesterday yet recognized something in the other now. Marshall watched the exchange with a furrowed brow, not in jealousy but in uncertainty, as though unsure of the shifting ground beneath his feet. He took a cup as well only after Tawa placed it beside him without asking. Pride prevented him from thanking Tawa aloud, but gratitude flickered in his eyes all the same. As they ate, Lily began speaking, not to fill silence, but because exhaustion had eroded the walls she'd been holding. "We left Willow Bend 3 weeks ago," she murmured, staring into the steam rising from her cup. "Marshall wanted a place of our own. Land with trees. Water close by. Somewhere we could build a life far from the noise." Her voice trembled, and she looked at the fire rather than at either man. "We thought we were strong enough. We thought love was enough to keep us safe." Marshall shifted, his expression tightening with a mixture of regret and determination. "It was my fault," he said. "I should have seen the road agents sooner. Shouldn't have trusted those men at the river crossing." His breath caught with pain. "I tried to fight them off." "You did," Lily whispered fiercely. "You saved me." Her eyes glistened. "But they took everything. Our supplies. Our blankets. Even our boots for trade." Tawa listened without interrupting, though his chest tightened. He knew the cruelty of men who took advantage of weakness. He had once fought men like that, had lost family to them. The memory lay cold and sharp in his ribs. "We walked for days," Lily continued, voice soft but steady. "Marshall's injury worsened. I kept thinking we'd find shelter before the storm hit, but—" Her voice faded, replaced by silence that spoke of helpless nights and desperate prayers whispered into freezing wind. She closed her eyes, fighting tears. "I didn't know if he would make it another night." Tawa's gaze drifted to Marshall, who sat rigid with shame, jaw trembling as though each breath hurt. "He would not have," Tawa said gently. "Not without rest. And warmth." Marshall's eyes flicked to his, surprised by the lack of judgment. Perhaps even relieved. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind rattled the boards, and snow swept across the roof with a low, restless hum, as if nature itself mourned the hardship within the barn. Inside, the fire cast a glow that felt like a fragile pocket of hope pressed against a world determined to swallow it. Tawa could feel the shift, how their presence had stirred something old inside him, something that remembered the ache of being hunted by fear, of hiding in barns and caves, of praying for dawn. He studied Lily quietly. Her face was thin with hunger, but strength radiated from her in a way that felt unexpectedly steadying. There was a softness to her that did not weaken her but weathered her, like river-worn stone. And when she looked at him now, there was no fear in her eyes, only an earnest searching, as though she sensed something unspoken resting under his silence. After a long moment she asked, "Do they come here often?" "Men who watch from the trees." Her voice trembled not from fear alone but from the knowledge she already carried, that danger had followed them too many miles to abandon them now. "No," Tawa answered. "Not unless they have reason." He paused. Today they found reason. Marshall tensed, but Tawa raised a hand in quiet reassurance. "You are not safe in your condition," he said. "And whoever watched us tonight may return with others." Lily's fingers curled against her skirt. "Why? Why would anyone care if two strangers shelter on your land?" "Because," Tawa said, his voice low and steady, "fear needs very little truth to make fire. And settlers fear what they do not understand. An Apache giving shelter to a white couple will stir whispers, even if no harm is done." The words settled heavily in the stillness. Marshall's jaw tightened. "Then we'll leave at dawn." "You won't make it beyond the low ridge," Tawa replied gently. "Not in his state. Not in this cold." Lily's breath trembled. She knew he was right. Marshall knew it too, though pride gnawed at him like a silent beast. The barn fell quiet again, save for the fire's steady breathing. A faint sound broke the silence. The crunch of snow. Slow. Measured. Another set of footsteps outside. Not hoofbeats this time. Footsteps. Lily's eyes shot to Tawa, and Marshall struggled upright despite his pain. Tawa rose, every muscle tightening with instinct. Someone was at the door again, closer than before. And this time they weren't alone. Snow sifted against the barn door in faint, nervous patterns as the footsteps outside halted, close enough that Tawa Red Elk could feel the presence on the other side. The fire crackled softly behind him, its warmth suddenly fragile, like a heartbeat in a cold world. Lily Hartwell clutched Marshall's arm, her breath quickening as fear carved itself into her expression. Marshall tried to rise again, too proud to appear helpless before whoever stood inches away, but his injured ribs seized sharply, and he fell back with a muted cry. Tawa lifted a hand, quieting him with a calm authority that eased tension even as danger coiled closer. The wooden door trembled inward under a gentle knock, soft but deliberate. A knock that carried curiosity rather than urgency, and that was somehow worse. Tawa stepped forward, placing himself between the door and the vulnerable couple. He opened it only enough to stand framed in the gap, his towering silhouette outlined by the lantern's golden glow behind him. Snow swirled in small eddies around the boots of the man outside. Deputy Crowder stood there, cloak dusted white, cheeks flushed from the cold. His eyes narrowed as they flicked past Tawa's shoulder, catching the motion of Lily's skirt, the faint sound of Marshall's ragged breathing. "Tawa Red Elk," Crowder said, forcing a tone of easy authority that failed to hide the suspicion twisting beneath it. "Thought I saw smoke on your land. Wanted to be sure everything was all right." His gaze lingered too long on the crack of light behind the Apache, searching for shadows that didn't belong. "Everything is fine," Tawa replied, voice calm but edged with steel. He did not widen the door. Crowder tilted his head, snowflakes melting in his beard. "Storm's bad tonight," he said. "Dangerous for anyone caught out in it, unless they're warm in someone else's shelter." The words sat heavy with implication. Tawa's jaw tightened, though his face remained composed. "No one is here without my invitation," Tawa answered. Crowder's smile thinned. "Funny thing. Old Sally Dunmore claimed she saw 3 sets of tracks leading this way before the snow started covering them." His boots shifted, crunching the ice beneath. "Odd, don't you think?" Tawa did not respond, and Crowder's eyes sharpened with satisfaction. "Mind if I step in and warm up? It's freezing out here." "You are warm enough," Tawa said plainly. "Good night, Deputy." Crowder's false politeness slipped. "I'll come back in the morning," he said, voice tightening. "With Sheriff Alden. Just to be sure everything on your land is lawful." He paused, letting the weight of that threat settle like fresh snow. "You take care now." Tawa closed the door before Crowder could finish the last of his smirk. The thud echoed through the barn like a gunshot. Lily's breath trembled through her lips and Marshall's face paled with dread. The tension held for several heartbeats until the sound of receding footsteps finally faded into the storm. Marshall whispered hoarsely, "He saw us." Not a question, certainty. Yes, Tawa said. Lily's fingers twisted into her skirt as she fought the rising fear. What will he do? She asked. Tawa crouched by the fire, stirring the embers with measured calm. Crowder does not need truth to cause trouble, he said. By dawn he will have stories to tell. Stories grow quickly in a town that already watches me with suspicion. He set another log into the fire, the sparks curling upward like orange fireflies. You should rest. We will face morning when it comes. But rest slithered from them like a skittish animal. Marshall lay back with a groan, sweat beading along his brow despite the cold. Lily sat beside him, softly wiping his forehead with a cloth Tawa had offered earlier. Her tenderness was steadying, though fear trembled beneath each gesture. Tawa watched her for a moment, how she held the man she loved with both strength and sorrow. It stirred something old in him, something buried under seasons of loss. You should sleep too, Tawa said quietly. Your body needs warmth and stillness. Lily looked up, meeting his eyes. In the flickering light, she looked fragile and fierce all at once. I can't, she confessed. Not knowing what waits outside. Not knowing what waits in the morning. She glanced at Marshall, then back at Tawa. I'm scared. Tawa nodded slowly, not to dismiss her fear but to acknowledge it. Fear is a teacher, he murmured. But it can blind you if you let it sit too long. He stood, retrieving a heavy fur from a nearby shelf, draping it around her shoulders. She startled softly at the gesture. Warmth first, he said. Worry after. The fire crackled gently, casting shadows that danced across the barn like restless memories. Outside, the storm howled, rattling the boards with cold fingers. Inside, something quieter stirred, connection, fragile but growing. Marshall drifted into a fitful sleep, leaving Lily and Tawa in a silence that felt delicate rather than empty. After a while, Lily spoke again, her voice softened by exhaustion. You said they don't trust you, she murmured. The townsfolk. They trust what they know, Tawa replied. And they know stories told by those who fear my people. His gaze remained steady on the fire. Fear paints the world with crooked colors. Lily absorbed this slowly, almost painfully. It's wrong, she whispered. You saved us. Not everyone sees kindness where they expect danger, he said. Some see danger no matter what is given. She lowered her eyes, drawing the fur closer around herself. Maybe they'll listen, she said quietly, though even she didn't believe it. Maybe, Tawa said, allowing her the hope she needed. But in his chest, truth sat heavier. The storm raged through the night. Lily dozed eventually, head resting lightly against Marshall's shoulder. Tawa remained awake, listening to the shifting wind, the restless horses, the soft breaths of the two strangers who had found their way into his life by chance, or fate. Something in this night felt like the turning of a river, slow but irreversible. He sensed it deep in his bones. Before dawn the wind died. Quiet crept across the land with a fragile stillness. Snow glowed faintly blue through the cracks in the barn walls. Tawa stepped outside briefly, scanning the tree line, noting the fresh hoofprints that had already begun to fill with snow. Crowder had indeed returned after leaving, circling, watching, waiting. Men like him always waited for daylight to justify their darkness. When he returned inside, Lily stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes. Marshall groaned with fever. Tawa knelt beside him, laying a hand gently on the man's forehead. His fever rises, he said. He needs medicine I do not keep here. Lily's face tightened with panic. Where can you get it? In town, Tawa replied. But if I walk into Willow Bend with you under my roof? He didn't finish, he didn't need to. I'll go, Lily said quickly. Tell them I found you on the road. Tell them we. No, Tawa said sharply. You would not make it in the cold. And they would not listen. He looked at Marshall's trembling body. We have little time. Lily's breath shook. Then what do we do? Tawa's gaze lifted to the barn door. We face morning. As sunlight finally touched the snow, faint voices drifted from the distance. Men's voices. More than one. Lily stiffened, clutching Marshall's hand. Tawa stood slowly, the calm in his posture contrasting the storm building outside. Through the cracks in the barn wall, shadows approached. Figures on horseback, led by Crowder, now with Sheriff Alden beside him. Crowder's cloak billowed behind him like a crow's wing, dark against the white snow. Alden held himself straighter, older, with a lawman's posture that spoke of rigid judgment. Lily clung tighter to Marshall. Tawa. I know, he said softly. The horses halted outside the barn. Crowder's voice rang out, loud enough for anyone inside to hear. Tawa Red Elk. Sheriff Alden is here to inspect your barn. Step aside if you're not hiding anything. Marshall tried to sit. Lily pressed him back gently, tears gathering but not falling. Tawa walked toward the door with the slow, grounded certainty of a man stepping into an old wound. The fire behind him cracked once as though protesting. He rested his hand on the latch. "Stay behind me," he told them softly. He opened the door. Snowlight flooded the barn, revealing the crowd outside. Sheriff Alden stared hard at Tawa, eyes narrowed. Crowder smirked triumphantly. And standing among them, unexpected, alarming, was old Sally Dunmore. Her expression was unreadable. "Tawa Red Elk," the sheriff said, voice cold as the snow, "we have reason to believe you are harboring fugitives." Tawa did not speak yet. His gaze flicked once toward Lily and Marshall behind him. Then he stepped forward. And the moment his boots touched the snow, 3 rifles lifted, aimed directly at his chest. Snowlight glared off the rifle barrels aimed at Tawa Red Elk's chest, throwing cold reflections across his skin like thin slices of winter steel. He stood in the doorway of his own barn, the storm-softened world behind him and the rigid line of townsmen before him, each holding their breath as if violence were a creature they could summon simply by exhaling. Sheriff Alden's expression remained stiff, carved by years of fear and duty tangled together until neither could be told apart. Lily Hartwell watched from behind Tawa's broad frame, her hand clamped over her mouth, while Marshall struggled to rise against the edges of his pain, pale with fever but unwilling to let another man stand alone for his sake. "Tawa Red Elk," the sheriff repeated, voice edged like frost, "we will search your barn." His gaze flicked briefly toward the shadows behind Tawa, suspicion sharpening the corners of his eyes. "Step aside or we will consider your refusal an act of obstruction." Tawa did not move. Snowflakes settled on his shoulders, melting against the lingering warmth of the barn. His voice, when it came, was steady as a mountain. "There is no threat here. Only 2 travelers who would have died without shelter." Crowder leaned forward in his saddle, a hungry gleam in his eyes. "2 travelers?" he echoed, smirking. "Funny. Folks say they saw a woman's face watching from this very barn last night. And now you expect us to believe you're just playing hero to stranded settlers." Lily flinched at Crowder's words. Marshall's fist clenched weakly on the blanket Tawa had wrapped him in hours before. The world seemed to narrow into that small space between Tawa's steady breath and the ready rifles aimed at ending it. Sheriff Alden raised a hand, signaling the men to hold. "Step aside," he repeated. "The law doesn't bend for storms or sympathy." "If the law is blind," Tawa said, "then it sees only what fear tells it to." A murmur rippled through the group. Crowder's smirk twitched with irritation. Alden's jaw tightened, his patience thinning. And in that charged stillness, old Sally Dunmore stepped forward, her shawl wrapped tight, face pale as the snow beneath her boots. She had been silent until now, eyes fixed on Tawa with something unreadable simmering beneath her wrinkles. "I saw the tracks," she said, voice brittle but carrying. "Saw them before the storm buried them. More than one set. They came here. And I gave them shelter," Tawa said, his voice softer now but no less firm. "Because they were dying." Crowder scoffed. A likely story from a man with every reason to lie. But Sally did not look away. "I didn't say he was lying," she murmured. Her eyes moved to Alden. "But the questions won't stop until we see for ourselves." Tawa felt Lily's breath catch behind him. Marshall sucked air through his teeth, bracing for what would follow. Slowly, Tawa lowered his gaze, not in surrender but in acceptance of the truth. There was only one way to protect them now. He lifted a hand, not toward the rifles but toward Lily. "It is all right," he said quietly in a tone meant only for her ears. "Come forward." The rifles twitched. Lily hesitated, fear locking her in place for a moment, until Tawa stepped aside just enough for the lantern light to fall across her pale face. She stepped out of the shadows, trembling but unbroken, and the sight of her sent a jolt through the men outside. Alden's brows rose. Crowder's mouth fell slightly open. Sally inhaled sharply, seeing not a threat but a girl exhausted to the bone, clinging to life by threads finer than snowflakes. Then Marshall staggered into view behind her, gripping the barn wall for balance, shirtless beneath the blanket, fever shining across his skin. He swayed once, nearly collapsing, and Lily rushed to support him, her small frame dwarfed by the weight she carried. "This man saved us," she said, voice cracking despite her attempt at strength. "We were freezing, dying. He gave us food, fire, shelter. Without him we would not be standing." Crowder barked a humorless laugh. "Or maybe he kept you," he snapped, "for reasons better left." Tawa moved before he finished the sentence, stepping so quickly between Crowder's accusation and Lily's shaking form that the snow itself seemed to pause. His voice, low and sharp, cut through the cold air like the strike of a blade. "No more lies." Crowder glared, but something in Tawa's stance, his sheer presence, carved not from arrogance but from worn dignity, made him swallow the remark that had perched nastily on his tongue. Alden shifted in his saddle. "If what the woman says is true, then the law owes thanks, but we still must determine if any crime has been committed." "Saving lives?" Tawa asked quietly. "Harboring fugitives?" Crowder snapped. "We are not fugitives," Lily protested, but Marshall's legs buckled beneath him before she could say more. Tawa caught him swiftly, lowering him gently to the snowy ground. The sight of the massive Apache cradling a weakened white settler stirred a wave of discomfort through the gathered men, an unexpected tenderness that did not fit their pre-carved narratives. Alden dismounted slowly, approaching the scene with cautious steps. "He's burning with fever," the sheriff muttered. "Won't make it 2 miles." "He won't make it an hour," Tawa corrected. Alden studied him, uncertainty flickering across the lines in his weathered face. Responsibility and prejudice warred quietly inside him. "If they stay on your land," he said, "people will talk." "People always talk," Tawa replied. "Truth is quieter." Sally's old eyes softened with something like shame. She stepped closer, voice trembling. "The girl needs warmth. The man needs a doctor." "I can ride with Sheriff Alden," Lily said suddenly, her voice cracking under the weight of what she was offering. "Explain everything. Make them understand. They'll send help." "No," Marshall rasped, lunging with what strength he had left to grip her hand. "You're not going back into that town alone." Tawa looked between them, the storm of their fear rising like wind inside his chest. "If she goes," he said gently, "the town will see her truth before they see any lie Crowder can tell." He glanced toward Crowder then, whose jaw tightened with resentment at the implication. "But she should not go alone." Lily turned to Tawa, eyes wide. "You would take me?" "Yes," Tawa said. "Because they fear me, and fear listens when it cannot escape." Alden hesitated, weighing the strange alliance before him. Finally he nodded once, gruffly. "If she rides with him, I'll allow it. And no man in town will fire a shot with a woman at his side." He cast a pointed glare at Crowder, whose scowl deepened. Marshall looked at Tawa, pain swallowing his pride. "Bring her back safe," he murmured. "I will," Tawa promised. He helped Lily onto his horse, the animal snorting clouds of warm breath into the frosted air. She trembled as she settled behind him, her hands gripping the leather strap. Tawa mounted with the quiet fluidity of a seasoned rider, the weight of the moment settling over them both. Crowder rode ahead, angry but silent, while Alden signaled the others to clear a path. Sally watched with a solemn expression, fingers twisting in her shawl as though she recognized the turning of fate. The journey to town carved a trail of tension through the frozen morning. Lily clung to Tawa's back, the warmth of his body the only barrier between her and the slicing wind. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her cheek, steady as a drum guiding soldiers through the dark. It grounded her, even as fear continued to nip at her thoughts. As they approached Willow Bend, whispers rose like a strange wind. People emerged from porches, from the mercantile, from the saloon, drawn by the spectacle of an Apache riding into town with a settler woman pressed close behind him. Faces twisted with confusion, judgment, curiosity. Tawa felt Lily stiffen. "Look forward," he murmured. "Let them see your courage before they see your fear." She lifted her chin. Alden drew his horse alongside them. "We'll go to the clinic first," he said. "Then I want your statement." But before they could move another inch, Deputy Crowder halted abruptly. He turned in his saddle with a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "There," he said, pointing. The crowd parted, and a tall, sharp-jawed man stepped forward, coat dusted with snow, eyes dark with something fierce and familiar. It was one of the road agents who had attacked Lily and Marshall, and when his gaze locked with Lily's, his mouth curled into a cold, knowing smile. Everything inside her went still. He tipped his hat. "Well," he drawled, "didn't expect to see you alive." Tawa felt her body tremble behind him. The man's hand drifted toward the gun at his hip, and the crowd held its breath as the world tilted into a moment that could break into violence with the slightest spark.